What if the Mongols had invaded Western Europe? If Genghis Khan's heirs had not turned their horses eastward, if they had pressed their armies forward into the heart of Europe, would our world still be the one we know? Or would we walk streets built not by the Renaissance, but by the Khanate? Imagine the year as 1241, a year that in our own history stands as a narrow escape for Europe. In that winter, the Mongols under Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis, had carved through the Rus, burned cities along the Danube, and shattered Christian armies at Legnica and Mohi. Their horse archers struck like ghosts, loosing arrows from impossible distances, wheeling away before the enemy could close. They moved with the precision of a clockwork storm, a kind of warfare alien to the slow, armored knights of Europe. In reality, they stopped. The reason was simple, yet monumental. News arrived from the east that Ogadai Khan, supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, was dead. By the traditions of their people, the princes of Genghis's blood were summoned to Karakoram to elect a new great Khan. Batu Khan, bound by loyalty and law, turned his armies back. The roads to Vienna, to Paris, to the Atlantic, roads that lay open before him, were left untouched. But what if that message never came? What if Ogadai had lived another decade, his health steady, and his appetite for conquest undimmed? What if Batu Khan, with no summons to obey, had looked west and seen a fractured continent ripe for the taking? The Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of rival princes, more concerned with each other than with distant threats. France stood proud yet politically cautious, her king uncertain whether these strange Eastern riders were a scourge from God or a danger to Christendom. England, insulated by the Channel, watched with curiosity but little urgency. The papacy, embroiled in its own power struggles, sought influence through intrigue rather than armies. It was a perfect storm of disunity, and the Mongols thrived on disunity. In this alternate timeline, the snows of early 1241 melt into a spring that will change the fate of Europe. Batu Khan sends his scouts deep into the forests and plains ahead, gathering intelligence with the same precision his armies bring to war. Reports confirm what he already suspects. The kingdoms and duchies of Europe are unprepared for a force like his. They have never faced an enemy that can ride 200 miles in a day, that can disappear into the horizon and return without warning. They have never fought soldiers who carry the siege knowledge of China and the Middle East in their saddlebags, trebuchets that can hurl stones heavier than a man, rockets and gunpowder bombs that roar like thunder. By April, the Danube is crossed with ease. The Mongols, masters of rivers and winter roads alike, sweep into Austria. Vienna's walls, impressive by European standards, are nothing the Khan's men have not breached before in Samarkand, in Bukhara, in the cities of the Khwarezmian Empire. Batu divides his forces with cold precision, sending one Tumen north into Bohemia to cut off reinforcements, while the main host encircles Vienna itself. Panic ripples through the courts of Europe. Messengers ride to the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who is in Italy, entangled in disputes with the Pope. He hesitates. Abandoning Italy might hand the papacy a political victory, yet ignoring the Mongols could spell disaster for the empire. In France, Louis IX debates whether to send aid to Austria or to fortify his own borders. England sends envoys instead of soldiers, its monarch unwilling to risk resources for what is still, in his eyes, a distant threat. And so Vienna stands alone. Within weeks, the city falls. The survivors speak of a storm unlike any in living memory, massive stone hurlers pounding the gates to splinters. In stews, towers collapsing under relentless fire, streets running with smoke and fear. Those who live to tell the tale flee westward, carrying with them a new kind of terror, one that travels faster than the hooves of the enemy. For the Mongols have not come to raid and vanish, they have come to conquer. With Vienna under his banner, Batu Khan turns his gaze toward Bavaria. The Alps to the south hold no interest for him. He wants the flatlands, the rivers, the arteries of trade and movement that will carry his armies deeper into the continent. Behind him, the smoldering ruins of Austria send a message to every city yet untouched. Resist, and you will be erased. Submit, and you may live. In the monasteries from Cologne to Paris, monks bend over their manuscripts with shaking hands, scratching out words that will echo through the ages. They come like locusts, and nothing remains in their wake. The spring sun warms the land, but for Europe, a shadow has fallen. And with each passing day, the drums of the steppe beat closer. The Mongol army that now advances westward is no ordinary host. It is a living machine, perfected through decades of relentless campaigns from the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea, an organism that breathes intelligence and exhales destruction. Its riders are bound not only by discipline, but by a shared understanding of war that is as much science as it is instinct. They communicate across vast distances through a relay system of mounted couriers, messages moving faster than Europe's own kings can summon their knights. Alongside the hardened warriors ride siege engineers from China and the Islamic world, masters of building war machines capable of turning stone walls into rubble within days. These engineers bring with them knowledge of counterweight trebuchets, gunpowder bombs, and even early forms of rocket-propelled projectiles, devices that roar and explode in ways European defenders cannot comprehend. By May, the Danube is no longer a barrier, but a highway for conquest. The Mongols seize every crossing, moving both armies and supplies with astonishing speed. Vienna, now stripped of its defenders and bled of its wealth, becomes a staging ground. Batu Khan wastes no time. His Tumans sweep across Austria and into the borderlands of Bavaria, striking with the same precision that felled cities in Persia and Kievan Rus. Scouts ride ahead, mapping every road, river, and village, identifying targets not merely for destruction, but for disruption. Communication lines between German princes are severed before they can even coordinate. The Holy Roman Empire's vaunted network of cities and markets, once a source of wealth and power, becomes a liability. Each town a vulnerable link in a chain the Mongols are snapping one by one. The psychological war deepens. Where resistance is fierce, the aftermath is brutal. Entire populations executed, survivors released only to spread tales of annihilation. Where surrender is immediate, the treatment is calculated. Tribute is demanded, soldiers taken into service, and hostages sent eastward to ensure loyalty. This policy of selective terror fractures European resolve. Some rulers, terrified of total destruction, seek terms with the Khan. Others cling to the belief that fortresses will hold, unaware that their walls are nothing compared to the sieges the Mongols have already mastered. As Bavarian towns fall, the political paralysis of Europe becomes glaring. Frederick II, still in Italy, refuses to march north until his disputes with the papacy are resolved. He sends letters to the princes of the empire urging them to raise armies, but each fears that another will seize the opportunity to expand their own power. Louis XIX in France orders defensive works along the eastern frontier, yet hesitates to commit troops beyond his own realm. England, distant and insulated, offers words of solidarity but no swords. Meanwhile, in the marketplaces of Genoa and Venice, merchants watch events with calculating eyes. They understand that the Mongols are not only destroyers, they are also facilitators of trade. Silk, spices, and precious metals flow along the arteries of their empire. Envoys from these cities approach Batu with offers. In exchange for safe passage and exemption from attack, they will supply ships, goods, and information. Batu, pragmatic and far-sighted, accepts. The Mediterranean ports will become tributary partners, their fleets and markets now serving the Khan's larger ambitions. This alliance sends ripples of alarm through the courts of Europe. It means that the Mongols will not need to rely solely on overland routes. They can move goods, armies, and intelligence by sea, bypassing choke points and striking with even greater unpredictability. In the summer of 1242, the Mongols pushed deeper into the empire. Nuremberg, famed for its strong walls and bustling trade, becomes the next target. The siege lasts less than a fortnight. Using siege towers taller than the walls themselves, and incendiary projectiles that set rooftops ablaze. They breach the defenses with terrifying efficiency. The city is plundered, its wealth carted away in endless caravans. The survivors speak of fire that fell from the sky, and of drums that never ceased beating through the night. With Nuremberg's fall, the path to the Rhineland lies open. The Rhine, long seen as a natural barrier against invasion, will soon be tested. In monasteries, chroniclers write by candlelight, their ink smudged by trembling hands. They compare the Mongols to the plagues of Egypt, to the horsemen of the apocalypse, yet none can find words that fully capture the scope of what is unfolding. The Mongols do not simply win battles, they dismantle societies, leaving behind a void where once there was order. In Paris, the news is met with dread. The king's advisors urge immediate preparation for siege, warning that the enemy could reach the city before the year's end. In the Low Countries, merchants begin to send their families and treasures across the Channel to England, hoping the sea will shield them from what is to come. And still the hooves drum westward, relentless, tireless, as if driven not merely by conquest, but by destiny itself. By the summer of 1242, the Mongol advance has become a relentless tide sweeping across the heart of Europe. The fall of Vienna and Nuremberg has shattered any illusion that this is a distant threat, yet the princes of the Holy Roman Empire remain unable or unwilling to unite. Each ruler clings to his own domain, fearing that in the absence of the Mongol menace, his neighbors might turn their swords upon him. This disunity is the oxygen the Khan's armies breathe. Batu Khan understands that victory in Europe will not be won by sheer force alone. It will be secured through the careful dismantling of political cohesion, by ensuring that no two European powers can align long enough to form an effective resistance. His Tumans fan out across Bavaria and into Swabia, striking with surgical precision at isolated garrisons and fortified towns. They avoid lengthy sieges when possible, preferring to lure defenders into open battle where the mobility and discipline of the Mongol cavalry can be unleashed. When confronted by heavily armored knights, the Mongols employ their well-honed feigned retreat, drawing the enemy into pursuit before encircling them with devastating volleys of arrows. The tactic, perfected on the steppes, proves no less lethal in the fields and forests of Germany. The psychological campaign intensifies. Survivors from destroyed towns are deliberately spared, sent westward with tales of unstoppable riders who appear at dawn and vanish by nightfall, leaving only ashes behind. These accounts travel faster than the Mongols themselves, hollowing out morale before the next battle is even fought. Fear becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. Papal envoys move from court to court, urging the rulers of Christendom to remember the unity of the Crusades, to see in the Mongols a common enemy worse than any infidel. Yet the Crusades were fought far from Europe's heart. This war is at their very doorsteps, and still pride and mistrust keep the crowns from cooperating. Frederick II remains in southern Italy, consumed by his conflict with the Pope, convinced that any march north would cost him his tenuous control of the region. In France, Louis IX listens to reports of burning cities and slaughtered armies, yet fears that leaving France's eastern frontier exposed could invite raids or rebellion from within. England's king, far from the carnage, contents himself with fortifying his ports and offering prayer instead of soldiers. In the absence of a united defense, the Mongols reach the Rhine by late autumn. The great river, often seen as an unbreachable barrier, falls to their ingenuity. Using captured ferries, hastily constructed pontoon bridges, and a relentless barrage from siege engines positioned on both banks, they cross in force. Cologne becomes the first major city west of the Rhine to feel the Mongols' wrath. Its half-built cathedral, once a symbol of faith and aspiration, now stands blackened by fire, its towering skeleton a grim monument to the futility of stone against the will of the Khan. Merchants who survive speak of precision in destruction, warehouses of grain burned to starve the countryside, bridges collapsed to isolate survivors, but workshops and forges left intact, ready to serve new masters. Batu Khan is not blind to the value of Europe's economic infrastructure. He envisions a continent not as a ruin, but as a jewel in the crown of the Great Khanate, its cities feeding the trade routes that already stretch from Korea to the Caspian. To this end, he begins establishing garrisons in select towns, leaving behind governors drawn from loyal allies and subject peoples. These governors collect tribute, enforce the Khan's law, and report back through the relay network that keeps the Mongol army connected over vast distances. But even as the Mongols consolidate their hold east of the Rhine, whispers of resistance grow louder. In the duchies of Flanders and Champagne, word spreads of a coalition forming, a desperate alliance of French knights, German levies, and the battered remnants of Hungarian and Polish forces who survived the earlier invasions. Their plan is audacious: to meet the Mongols in open battle before they can reach Paris or the ports of the Atlantic. It is a gamble born of desperation, for if they fail, there will be nothing left to stop the Khan from taking all of France and beyond. As winter descends, the stage is set for a confrontation that could determine the fate of Western Europe. In the camps of the Mongols, the fires burn bright against the frost, the warriors sharpening their blades, their horses pawing at the frozen earth. Batu Khan looks west, knowing that beyond the horizon lies not just victory, but the possibility of reshaping the world. And somewhere in the distance, the coalition gathers, clinging to the hope that they might yet halt the tide. The air between them is heavy with the knowledge that soon the plains will run red. The armies meet on the wide plains of Champagne in the early months of 1243, a bleak and windswept land where the winter's frost still clings to the earth, and the breath of men and horses steams in the cold air. The coalition has assembled every force it can muster: French knights in gleaming armor, German infantry in their heavy mail, Hungarian and Polish veterans whose faces bear the hard lines of those who have already survived a Mongol onslaught. Their banners, rich with heraldry, ripple against the gray sky, a spectacle meant to project strength, though beneath the surface lies the gnawing fear that they face an enemy unlike any the chivalric codes have prepared them for. Batu Khan surveys the scene from a low ridge, his gaze calm, almost detached, as if the outcome is already written. His generals, hardened men like Subutai's protégés, outline the plan with the quiet certainty of those who have executed it countless times before. The Mongols will not meet this force head-on in the manner of Western war. Instead, they will let the Europeans think themselves superior, drawing them into the trap that has crushed so many armies from China to the steppes of Russia. As the morning mist lingers over the plain, the battle begins with a rain of arrows. The Mongol horse archers ride in wide arcs, loosing shafts with precision from the saddle, their composite bows bending like living things in their hands. The European knights, proud and impetuous, see the horsemen withdrawing and believe the tide is already turning. Trumpets blare, spurring the charge. Heavy cavalry thunders forward, hooves pounding, lances aimed at the retreating enemy. But the retreat is an illusion, a deadly dance perfected over generations. The knights, eager for glory, stretch their lines, outpacing the slower infantry and leaving themselves isolated. Then the trap closes. From the flanks, hidden wings of Mongol cavalry sweep inward, unleashing volleys from both sides. Arrows find the joints in armor, the gaps in visors, the unprotected horses. The charge falters, confusion setting in as the knights realize they are surrounded. The infantry, still struggling across the churned mud of the battlefield, arrives too late to rescue them. The Mongols press the advantage, their war drums booming like thunder across the plain. Smoke rises from incendiary arrows fired into the coalition's supply wagons at the rear, cutting off any hope of regrouping. By midday, the field is a maelstrom of panic and slaughter. The coalition's leaders attempt to rally their men, but the discipline of the Mongol formations is unbreakable, their coordination seemingly effortless despite the chaos. When the Europeans attempt to form a defensive circle, the Mongols simply pull back, encircling them at a distance and resuming the arrow storm until fatigue and despair erode the last resistance. By nightfall, the coalition is shattered. The dead lie in heaps, their banners trampled into the blood-soaked earth. The survivors are few, many captured, some spared for ransom, others executed on the spot as examples. Among the captives are nobles whose names carry weight in the courts of Europe. Batu Khan will use them not only for gold, but as political leverage to weaken the remaining opposition. The road to Paris now lies open, yet Batu does not rush to take the city. His strategy is deeper, more methodical. He sends detachments south into Burgundy to threaten the Rhône Valley, knowing this will force the French to divide their defenses. Another force rides north toward Flanders, cutting off potential reinforcements from the Low Countries. Everywhere the Mongols move, they spread uncertainty and fear, ensuring that no front can stabilize before the next blow falls. In Italy, news of the battle's outcome sends ripples through the courts. Frederick II realizes that the threat can no longer be ignored, but his own political quagmire with the papacy continues to bind his hands. In the Mediterranean, Genoese and Venetian merchants solidify their arrangements with the Khan, offering ships, maps, and intelligence in exchange for protection of their trade routes. These agreements, made in the shadows of war, will shape the geopolitics of the entire region for decades to come. As spring approaches, Paris fortifies its walls, the city's mood grim but defiant. Louis IX remains within the capital, determined to resist, but his advisors are haunted by the fate of cities like Kiev and Baghdad, which once believed themselves impregnable. Beyond the city, the countryside is already feeling the Mongol grip. Villages burned, fields razed, refugees flooding the roads, each one a living warning of what happens when the Khan's will is defied. Yet Batu is patient. He knows that war is not only about speed, but about shaping the enemy's mind until surrender seems like the only rational choice. The drums of the steppe beat on, their rhythm echoing across the plains, a promise that the next great siege of Europe is about to begin. Spring of 1243 finds Paris girded for war, its gates reinforced, its towers bristling with archers, and its streets lined with barricades hastily thrown up by fearful citizens. The city's bells toll at odd hours, summoning militias to drill and warning watchmen to keep their eyes fixed eastward, where riders have reported smoke columns on the horizon. Louis XIX walks the ramparts himself, a young king already famed for his piety, now forced to shoulder the burden of defending not only France, but perhaps the last bastion of Western Christendom. In the markets, whispers fly like swallows. Some speak of miracles, others of doom. Yet all know that the armies of the Khan are unlike anything Europe has faced. To the east, Batu Khan moves deliberately, his forces sweeping through Champagne and Burgundy with methodical precision. He does not strike Paris immediately. Instead, he carves a ring of devastation around it, severing trade routes, burning granaries, and forcing surrounding towns into submission. This strategy is as old as the steppe itself. Starve the city, drain its allies, and make the siege a final act rather than a drawn-out gamble. Detachments of light cavalry ride as far as the Loire, setting villages aflame to send the message that no corner of France is beyond their reach. Refugees pour into Paris, bringing tales of slaughter and humiliation, their stories eroding the morale of even the bravest defenders. Inside the Mongol camp, the atmosphere is one of controlled intensity. Engineers oversee the construction of siege machines from timber harvested in the forests of the Seine Valley, massive trebuchets capable of hurling stones and incendiaries over the walls, siege towers clad in wet hides to resist fire, and rams tipped with iron to batter the gates. The Khan's advisors discuss not only tactics but politics. Emissaries are dispatched to the courts of England and Aragon with offers of alliance or at least neutrality, in exchange for trade privileges once France is subdued. Batu knows that victory will be more enduring if the surrounding powers see the Mongols not solely as destroyers, but as inevitable rulers. In Paris, the tension builds. The clergy lead processions through the streets, holding relics aloft in hopes of divine intervention, while the city's guilds pool resources to fortify weak points in the walls. Every day, lookouts scan the countryside, and every day the enemy draws nearer. By early summer, Mongol outriders are sighted less than a day's ride from the capital. The air grows thick with the smell of campfires and horse sweat, and the distant boom of war drums becomes a constant undertone to daily life. Yet the attack does not come all at once. Instead, Batu tightens the noose, cutting the last supply lines, intercepting couriers, and ensuring that Paris is as isolated as a castle on an island. When at last the main host arrives, it is a sight that freezes the blood. Tens of thousands of riders form a living ring around the city, banners snapping in the wind, their colors alien to the Parisian eye. Siege engines rumble forward, their shadows stretching long in the evening light. The first night is eerily quiet, as if the Mongols mean to let the city feel the full weight of what is about to unfold. On the second day, the bombardment begins. Stones the size of oxen crash into rooftops, setting fires that race through the narrow streets. Arrows tipped with pitch streak through the sky like falling stars. The defenders fight valiantly, dousing flames and returning fire where they can, but the psychological strain is immense. From the walls, they can see enemy soldiers moving with frightening coordination, their ranks unbroken by the chaos of battle. Paris holds out for weeks, each day a test of endurance. Disease begins to creep in as food grows scarce, and the air fills with the stench of unburied dead. Inside the city, the mood shifts from defiance to desperation. Some urge negotiation, others cling to the hope of a relief army that never comes. Outside the walls, Batu waits, knowing that time is on his side. His scouts report that the English are unwilling to commit troops, and the remnants of the coalition, shattered at Champagne, have scattered too far to regroup. The siege tightens until Paris feels less like a city and more like a trap. And then, one night, under a moonless sky, the Mongols make their move. Scaling ladders rise against the walls as sappers undermine the gates. The roar of battle erupts in the darkness, a sound that will echo in the memory of survivors for the rest of their lives. The fate of Paris, and of France itself, hangs in the balance as the city braces for the final assault. The assault on Paris begins in the dead of night, the moon shrouded behind thick clouds, the city's defenders jolted awake by the deep, resonant boom of Mongol war drums rolling across the darkened fields. From every quarter of the encircling host, horns blare, their notes mingling with the sharp whistles used by Mongol commanders to coordinate attacks in the blackness. Siege towers, rolled forward under cover of night, now loom against the walls like monstrous silhouettes, their wooden hides slick with water to resist fire. Trebuchets launch a steady rain of boulders and incendiaries, some filled with burning pitch, others with strange ceramic spheres that burst into choking smoke upon impact. On the eastern wall, scaling ladders appear like the teeth of some vast predator, Mongol warriors swarming upward with the speed and agility of men who have done this countless times. Defenders hack at the ladders, hurl boiling water, and fire crossbows into the mass below. But for every attacker that falls, two more take his place. On the northern gate, sappers have tunneled for days, and now the ground trembles as supports are pulled away. With a crash like thunder, part of the gatehouse collapses, and the Mongols surge through the breach. The fighting in the streets is savage and disorienting. Paris's narrow alleys, so familiar to its citizens, become killing grounds as mounted Mongols dismount to fight on foot, using short bows and curved sabers in tight quarters. The defenders fight with desperate ferocity, guildsmen standing shoulder to shoulder with knights, priests wielding maces alongside soldiers, but the coordination of the invaders is impossible to match. Horn calls echo through the city as Mongol units communicate across districts, closing pockets of resistance one by one. Fires rage in the marketplace and along the banks of the Seine, the glow reflecting in the river like molten gold. The great bells of Notre Dame toll endlessly, their sound both a rallying cry and a lament, while the cathedral itself becomes a fortress, its massive doors barred, its towers bristling with archers. Yet even here, the inevitability of defeat seeps in. By dawn, large swaths of the city lie in Mongol hands. Batu Khan rides through the breach, surrounded by his personal guard, the streets falling silent at the sight of him. His orders are as calculated as they are ruthless. Key buildings are to be spared for administrative use, workshops and forges preserved to serve the Khanate, But the homes of resisting districts are put to the torch as a warning. Surviving nobles are brought before him, their fates decided in moments, some executed, others bound for ransom or exile. Louis IX, unwilling to abandon his people, is captured after making a final stand near the Old Palace. His capture sends shockwaves across Europe, for the idea of a king of France in Mongol chains is unthinkable, yet now reality. Batu wastes no time in exploiting this. Envoys ride to England, Aragon, and the German states, offering terms of peace in exchange for tribute, warning that defiance will earn them the same fate as Paris. Many rulers, seeing the fall of the French capital and the capture of its king, bend the knee without a fight. In the weeks that follow, Paris is transformed. Mongol banners hang from its walls, patrols ride its streets, and a governor appointed by Batu begins reorganizing the city as a provincial center of the Great Khanate. Taxes are levied in silver and goods, craftsmen are ordered to produce equipment for the empire's armies, and markets bustle once more under the watchful eyes of foreign soldiers. To the commoner, life becomes a mixture of fear and strange prosperity. Trade flows again. But under the iron framework of Mongol law, swift and merciless in its punishments. Yet beneath the surface, resentment simmers. Clergy whisper of rebellion, exiled nobles plot from across the channel, and the countryside seethes under the weight of imposed levies. But Batu is already looking beyond France. His gaze turns toward the Iberian Peninsula, toward the rich ports and fertile lands that, once subdued, would complete the conquest of Western Europe. Scouts report on the fragmented kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal, and on the Muslim stronghold of Granada, still holding out in the south. To the Khan, these are not obstacles but opportunities, each a prize to be claimed, each a stepping stone to turning the Atlantic into another shore of the Mongol world. In the summer of 1244, with France under his heel, Batu Khan begins preparations for the next campaign. The hooves of his messengers already carrying word of the Khan's triumph to every corner of Europe and beyond. The question is no longer whether the Mongols can take the West, it is whether anyone remains who can stop them. By the autumn of 1244, the map of Western Europe has been redrawn in the colors of the Great Khanate, with Paris serving as the westernmost jewel in Batu Khan's crown. From the Baltic to the Bay of Biscay, Mongol governors enforce the Khan's law. Tribute flows eastward in steady caravans, and the once proud kingdoms of France and the Holy Roman Empire exist only as vassal territories. Yet Batu is not content to rule what he has taken. His vision, inherited from Genghis himself, is of an empire without boundaries, where all lands fall beneath the eternal blue sky. His eyes turn now toward the Iberian Peninsula, a region fractured into rival crowns, Castile, Aragon, Portugal, and the Muslim Emirate of Granada, holding its corner of Al-Andalus. To a Mongol strategist, this division is an open invitation. The campaign begins with the same relentless preparation that broke the backbone of France. Scouts penetrate deep into Iberia, mapping its roads, measuring the strength of its castles, and noting the rivalries between Christian and Muslim rulers. Envoys ride ahead to Granada with offers of alliance. Submit peacefully, pay tribute, and retain your lands under the Khan's protection. In a move that shocks the Christian kingdoms, the Emir of Granada accepts, calculating that Mongol protection will be a shield against his northern enemies. This alliance grants Batu a southern flank secured and access to Muslim engineers well versed in the art of siege and naval warfare. By early 1245, the first Mongol Tumans crossed the Pyrenees, moving like a tide into the lands of Aragon. Towns that resist are swept aside in days, their walls no match for trebuchets hurling massive stones and for towers advancing under a hail of arrows. The speed of the Mongol advance catches the Iberian kings unprepared. Their armies, still weary from years of conflict with both Muslims and each other, cannot form a united front in time. Aragon falls first, its capital sacked, its king fleeing to the coastal fortress of Valencia, only to be cornered and forced into surrender. With Aragon pacified, Batu divides his forces. One host sweeps west into Castile, striking at Toledo and the Central Plains, while another moves south to join Granada's forces in pressuring Portugal. In Castile, the pattern repeats: swift assaults, relentless pressure, and a psychological campaign that leaves entire towns surrendering without a fight, rather than face annihilation. The King of Castile is captured outside Toledo after a failed attempt to break the Mongol siege, his army shattered by flanking maneuvers that seem to come from nowhere. Portugal, isolated and hemmed in, holds out longer. Its Atlantic coastline offers the hope of escape or foreign aid, but none comes. England, still licking its wounds from France's fall, dares not provoke the Khan. The papacy, powerless to raise another crusade, can only watch and issue impotent condemnations. By late summer, Lisbon too has fallen, its ports now under the banner of the Khanate. The conquest of Iberia is complete in less than 2 years, a pace so swift it sends shudders across the Mediterranean. The Mongols now control not only the land routes, but also key ports that open the Atlantic and Mediterranean to their fleets. Trade from Africa, the Middle East, and even distant India flows into these ports, enriching the Khanate and binding its far-flung territories into a single economic system. Yet conquest brings not only power but new challenges. In the hills of northern Castile, resistance movements form, striking at supply lines and disappearing into the mountains. Former knights and soldiers who refuse to submit become outlaws, harassing garrisons and ambushing patrols. Batu responds with a mixture of brutality and pragmatism. Villages suspected of aiding rebels are destroyed, but others are offered leniency and reduced taxes in exchange for loyalty. Granada thrives under Mongol rule, its markets bustling with goods from east and west, its alliance proving profitable. Yet even here, the seeds of unrest are sown, for the people know they serve foreign masters, and loyalty born of convenience can vanish when the winds change. With Iberia subdued, Batu turns his attention to the sea. He orders the construction of a fleet at the captured ports, crewed by a mix of Mongol allies, Genoese sailors, and Muslim shipwrights. This fleet, he envisions, will not only patrol the coasts, but carry the Khan's reach beyond Europe, to the British Isles, to North Africa, and perhaps farther still. In the winter councils of 1246, as snow falls on Paris and the steppes alike, Batu lays out his grand design. The Atlantic is no longer the edge of the world. It is the next frontier. And as his generals listen, they understand that the Mongol storm, which began on the far side of Asia, has not yet reached its peak. By the spring of 1247, the Khanate's banners fly from the Pyrenees to the shores of the Atlantic, and from the ports of Lisbon to the walls of Paris. Yet Batu Khan's gaze now turns toward the last unconquered realm in the western seas, the British Isles. England has so far escaped the storm not through strength, but through circumstance, its channel waters serving as a moat that the Mongol cavalry cannot cross on horseback. But with the Iberian ports now under Mongol control, and shipyards in Lisbon, Porto, and Bordeaux working day and night under the supervision of Genoese and Muslim shipwrights, that moat is about to lose its power. The plan is audacious: a coordinated amphibious assault on England's southern coast, supported by simultaneous raids into Scotland and Ireland to prevent the English from rallying allies. Scouts and spies already operate within the kingdom, gathering intelligence on coastal fortifications, garrisons, and the loyalties of local lords. Some of these lords, discontent with the English crown, send secret messages to the Khan's envoys, offering information and even the promise of safe landing points in exchange for gold or future favor. In London, the court of King Henry III is a place of growing anxiety. Reports of the Mongol fleet's construction have reached him through merchants and travelers, and while his advisors urge massive fortifications along the southern coast, the treasury is strained by years of defensive preparations and the loss of lucrative trade routes now in Mongol hands. Appeals to the papacy for a unified Christian defense fall on deaf ears. Rome, humiliated by the fall of France and Iberia, lacks both the political clout and the resources to summon another crusade. Meanwhile, Batu Khan ensures that the British Isles will be softened before the first Mongol ship lands. Fleets of swift raiding vessels, crewed by a mix of seasoned seafarers from the Mediterranean and archers from the steppe, begin striking out from Brittany and western France. They burn coastal villages in Cornwall, capture merchant ships in the Channel, and vanish before English forces can respond. The purpose is not conquest yet, but disruption, to weaken morale, damage the economy, and accustom the English to a sense of helplessness. By midsummer, the full invasion begins. Under a rising sun, hundreds of ships sail from Bordeaux and Lisbon, their decks packed with horsemen, siege equipment disassembled for transport, and stores of arrows and powder. The English navy, smaller and less organized, attempts to intercept near the Isle of Wight, but is driven back in a brutal clash that leaves the waters littered with debris and bodies. Within days, Mongol forces land near Portsmouth, establishing a fortified beachhead from which cavalry can ride inland once their horses are reassembled and rested. The first targets are not major cities, but the surrounding countryside. Villages are razed, roads secured, and supply depots established. The English forces that do muster to resist are met with the same tactics that felled the Knights of France: feigned retreats, sudden flanking maneuvers, and a rain of arrows that shatters formations before swords can even be drawn. London braces for siege, its walls strengthened, but Batu does not yet move on the capital. Instead, he sends detachments north into the Midlands, ensuring that no unified force can gather to defend the heart of the kingdom. Scotland, sensing both opportunity and danger, sends envoys to Batu offering neutrality, and perhaps even tribute, in exchange for being left unmolested. The Khan accepts, for now, preferring to focus on consolidating England before turning north. In Ireland, Mongol ships raid ports and harbors, but no large-scale landing is attempted yet. The island remains a potential future conquest, its internal divisions promising easy prey when the time comes. By late autumn, southern England is firmly in Mongol hands, and London, cut off from much of its hinterland, faces the same strangling isolation that doomed Paris. Yet Batu Khan once again proves himself as much a political strategist as a conqueror. He sends emissaries to the English court offering terms: surrender and become a tributary state, retaining the monarchy as a vassal under the Khan's authority, or face the fate of France. The offer sows division within England's ruling class. Some see it as a chance to preserve the kingdom, others as a humiliation worse than death. While they argue, the Mongol army continues to tighten its grip, and the shadow of the steppe stretches further across the map. The conquest of the British Isles is no longer a question of possibility, only of time. The winter of 1247 into 1248 finds England in a state of slow suffocation, its southern coasts firmly in Mongol hands, its trade strangled, and its countryside stripped of grain and livestock to feed the occupying forces. The once bustling roads between London and the southern ports are now patrolled by mounted archers, whose presence alone keeps merchants and messengers from daring the journey. In London, King Henry III sits in council, surrounded by nobles and clerics, whose voices are split between defiance and submission. Some urge a desperate counterattack, arguing that the Mongol fleet is vulnerable to storms and could be trapped in harbor if the English strike now. Others, looking to the fate of France and Iberia, believe resistance is futile and that vassalage to the Khan is the only way to preserve the monarchy in any form. Batu Khan, encamped in Winchester, understands these divisions and works to widen them. He releases prominent prisoners with messages for the king, each bearing both the promise of mercy and the warning of utter destruction should England resist further. His envoys, skilled in the politics of conquest, whisper to certain lords that their lands and titles will be preserved under Mongol rule if they pledge loyalty now. These overtures bear fruit. Several southern lords swear fealty in exchange for protection, weakening the kingdom's ability to mount a unified defense. Meanwhile, Mongol detachments push deeper into the interior, capturing key river crossings and cutting off London from supplies brought in overland from the north. The city's reliance on the Thames for trade becomes a weakness as Mongol ships begin patrolling the river, intercepting cargoes before they reach the capital. By early spring, London is effectively under siege without a formal assault, its markets thinly stocked, prices soaring, and the poorer districts beginning to suffer from hunger. Yet Batu does not rush to storm the city. He has learned from decades of steppe warfare that a fortress taken by starvation and fear yields far greater submission than one taken by brute force. Instead, he spends the months of March and April expanding control northward, securing Oxford, Cambridge, and key Midlands towns, each falling with minimal resistance after witnessing the swiftness of the Mongol advance. In the north, whispers of Scottish intervention fade as the reality of Mongol naval patrols in the North Sea becomes clear. Edinburgh's court decides to honor its neutrality pact, sending tribute and supplies rather than risking invasion. Ireland remains on the periphery of the Khan's plans, raided but not yet subdued, though its western ports increasingly find themselves blockaded by Allied fleets from Granada and Genoa, operating under Mongol command. By May, with England's resources stretched thin and no foreign aid arriving, Batu makes his final move. His forces surround London on all sides. Siege engines rolled into position, and the river choked with armed vessels. The city's defenders, weary and outnumbered, man the walls but know in their hearts that relief will not come. After several days of bombardment, more to sap morale than to breach the walls, envoys bearing white banners approach the gates. The terms they carry are stark. London will surrender. The king will remain as a vassal monarch under Mongol oversight. Annual tribute will be paid in silver, grain, and ships, and a garrison of the Khan's troops will be stationed in the capital. Failure to accept will mean the fate of Kiev and Baghdad. Total destruction. The council debates for a single night, but the decision is already made by the hunger in the streets and the memory of cities that vanished into ash. On the morning of June 1st, 1248, the gates of London open, and Batu Khan rides in at the head of his guard, the hooves of their horses clattering against the cobblestones as silent crowds watch from doorways and windows. The Mongol banners rise above the tower, and the English crown becomes another jewel in the endless empire of the great Khan. Yet even in this moment of triumph, Batu's mind turns to the next horizon. With all of Western Europe under his rule or tribute, his gaze shifts toward the Mediterranean's southern shores, where the wealthy cities of North Africa and the crossroads of the Islamic world await. The conquest of Europe is nearly complete, but for the Khan, there is no such thing as an end, only the next beginning. By the late summer of 1248, the Great Khanate's shadow stretches over every kingdom of Western Europe, from the windswept coasts of Portugal to the bustling markets of London, from the vineyards of Bordeaux to the snow-capped peaks of the Pyrenees. Yet Batu Khan's ambitions do not rest. The Atlantic, once the edge of the known world, is now merely another frontier, and the southern horizon beckons with promises of wealth and strategic mastery. Across the narrow waters of the Strait of Gibraltar lies North Africa, a region of ancient cities, fortified ports, and trade networks that carry gold, ivory, and spices from the heart of the continent to the Mediterranean. The sultanates of Morocco, the Hafsid rulers of Tunis, and the Emirate of Ifriqiya all stand as independent powers, but they are divided by rivalry, each guarding its own trade routes and coastal strongholds. To Batu, this fragmentation is as inviting as the quarrels of Europe had been. Preparations for the crossing begin almost immediately after the submission of England. Shipyards in Lisbon, Cadiz, and Bordeaux work without pause, their laborers producing galleys and transports under the supervision of Genoese and Muslim shipwrights, who now serve the Khan. The fleet that will carry the Mongol host across the strait is unlike anything Europe or Africa has seen. A hybrid armada of Mediterranean galleys, Iberian caravels, and swift raiding vessels designed for sudden coastal strikes. Granada, still a loyal ally and beneficiary of the Khan's protection, provides both intelligence and pilots familiar with the currents and winds of the narrow passage. By early 1249, the invasion begins. The fleet moves under cover of pre-dawn fog, crossing from Algeciras to Tangier in a matter of hours. The initial landings are met with resistance from local forces, but the Mongols have learned the value of shock and speed. Cavalry disembarks from the ships with practiced efficiency, mounts prepared in advance, and within hours they fan out across the coastal plain, cutting off roads to prevent reinforcements from reaching Tangier. The city falls within 3 days, its gates battered by siege engines that had been dismantled and carried across the water in the fleet's holds. From Tangier, Batu pushes east along the coast toward Ceuta and west toward Rabat, establishing a chain of strongpoints that will serve both as supply bases and as symbols of the Khan's new authority. The Moroccan Sultan attempts to rally his forces in the interior, but the Mongols are not content to fight on ground chosen by the enemy. They launch deep raids into the Atlas foothills, bypassing strongholds to strike at caravans and agricultural centers, forcing the Sultan to divide his attention between defending his heartland and protecting the vital trans-Saharan trade routes. By mid-year, Rabat and Fez have fallen, the latter after a brief but intense siege in which Mongol engineers introduced counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling incendiary projectiles far beyond the range of the city's defenders. The psychological impact is devastating. North African cities that once prided themselves on their impregnable walls now whisper the same fearful refrain as Europe had, that no stone barrier can stop the horsemen of the steppe. From Morocco, Batu's forces sweep eastward along the coast, entering the rich lands of modern-day Algeria. The Hafsid rulers of Tunis, seeing the rapid collapse of their western neighbors, send envoys offering tribute in exchange for autonomy. Batu accepts, at least for now, preferring to avoid a prolonged siege of Tunis while his forces are still consolidating Morocco. Instead, he demands hostages and a permanent Mongol garrison in the city's port, ensuring that its fleets and trade serve the Khan's greater designs. The conquest of North Africa not only adds immense wealth to the empire, but also grants strategic control of both sides of the Strait of Gibraltar and much of the western Mediterranean. Trade routes from the Sahara now feed directly into the Mongol system, gold and salt caravans guarded by soldiers bearing the Khan's banner. Spices from the east, silks from China, and goods from across Eurasia now flow unimpeded into African markets, binding the continent into the fabric of the Mongol world. Yet even as Batu cements his hold, his ambitions stretch further. The ports of Tunis and Tripoli are gateways to the central Mediterranean, within striking distance of Sicily, the Italian peninsula, and the rich Byzantine lands beyond. In his councils, the next phase of conquest is already being mapped, a great push eastward across the sea to bring the last independent bastions of the Mediterranean into the fold. For Batu Khan, the conquest of Europe and North Africa is not an ending, it is merely the foundation for a world that bends entirely to the will of the Great Khanate. By the early months of 1250, the Great Khanate controls the western Mediterranean like a clenched fist, its fleets patrolling the Strait of Gibraltar and the coasts of Iberia, Morocco, and Algeria, its garrisons planted in every major port from Lisbon to Tunis. Batu Khan, now in the prime of his power, turns his eyes toward the heart of the Old World, the central Mediterranean, where Sicily, southern Italy, and the islands of the Aegean form stepping stones toward the Byzantine Empire. Sicily is the first target, both for its fertile lands and its strategic position as a crossroads of sea trade between Africa, Italy, and the Levant. The island, under the rule of the remnants of the Hohenstaufen dynasty, has been weakened by years of political instability and feuds with the papacy. Batu knows that a decisive strike here will not only secure the island, but also open a direct path into the Italian peninsula. In the spring, a massive fleet sails from Tunis and Algiers, carrying Mongol cavalry, siege engineers, and allied troops from Granada and the Hafsid ports. The crossing is swift and brutal. Coastal watchtowers spot the armada too late, and the initial landings near Palermo are met with disorganized resistance. The defenders are quickly swept aside by Mongol horsemen who, even dismounted, fight with terrifying speed and precision. Siege engines, assembled onshore from prefabricated components carried in the ship's holds, begin their work within days, pounding the city walls with relentless force. Palermo falls in less than a fortnight. Its citadel surrendered in exchange for the lives of its garrison. Batu wastes no time consolidating the conquest. Messina and Catania are next, falling in rapid succession as news of Palermo's fate spreads terror across the island. The conquest of Sicily sends shockwaves into Italy. Pope Innocent IV, already humiliated by the Mongol domination of France and England, calls for a holy alliance to defend the Papal States and the city of Rome itself. Yet the Italian city-states, Venice, Genoa, Pisa, Florence, are wary of committing to open war, knowing that their merchant fleets now profit under Mongol-protected trade routes. Many quietly negotiate neutrality or tribute, unwilling to risk destruction. By midsummer, Mongol fleets cross from Sicily into southern Italy, landing near Naples and Taranto. The Kingdom of Naples, nominally under papal influence, is ill-prepared for the disciplined, multi-pronged assault. Mongol detachments advance swiftly along the coastal roads, while others move inland to cut communications between the southern cities and the papal forces further north. Resistance collapses in weeks, and the Mongols establish strongholds along both the Tyrrhenian and Adriatic coasts, creating a chokehold over maritime traffic. Rome braces for siege, its ancient walls repaired, its citizens called to arms. But Batu does not yet march on the eternal city. Instead, he focuses on breaking the will of the Italian heartland. He sends envoys to Venice and Genoa with an ultimatum: join the Canete's trade network willingly, or face the fate of the cities that resisted in France and England. The response is cautious compliance. Venetian and Genoese ships begin supplying the Mongol armies with grain, timber, and information, further isolating the papacy. In the autumn of 1250, the Khan's gaze shifts eastward across the Adriatic toward the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, still the jewel of the eastern Mediterranean, sits as both a prize and a rival, controlling the straits into the Black Sea and the trade routes to the east. Batu understands that to truly unify Eurasia under the Khaganate, the city must either submit or be taken. Scouts and spies are already at work in the Aegean Islands, mapping harbors and garrisons, seeking allies among the fractious lords of the region. Yet Batu is patient. He knows that the fall of Constantinople will require both overwhelming force and a calculated political campaign to prevent the Eastern powers from rallying. For now, the Mongol banners fly over Sicily, southern Italy, and the North African coast, the Mediterranean's central waters, firmly under the Khan's command. The empire that began on the cold steppes of Mongolia now stretches across 3 continents, its armies and fleets bound together by an iron system of law, tribute, and fear. And still, Batu's ambitions are not sated. The final act of his conquest will soon begin, aimed at the city that for 1,000 years has been the gateway between East and West. By the spring of 1251, the Mediterranean trembles under the weight of Mongol supremacy, and the eyes of Batu Khan fix upon the greatest prize left unconquered, Constantinople. For centuries it has stood as the bridge between Europe and Asia, a city of gold-domed churches, towering walls, and bustling harbors where merchants from every corner of the known world converge. The Byzantine Empire, though diminished from its former glory, still commands the Bosporus and the trade routes that link the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. To Batu, controlling Constantinople means not only the unification of Europe under the Khanate, but also the completion of a continuous empire from the Atlantic to the gates of China. The campaign begins in the summer, when Mongol fleets from Sicily, Tunis, and southern Italy converge with contingents sailing from the Black Sea ports of the Khanate's eastern territories. The sheer size of the armada is unprecedented. Hundreds of ships carrying cavalry, infantry, siege engineers, and provisions enough to sustain a prolonged siege. At the same time, overland armies march through the Balkans, subduing fortified towns in Macedonia and Thrace, cutting the Byzantines off from their remaining allies and tightening the noose around the city. Emperor John III, Dukas Vatatzes, ruling from Nicaea, scrambles to gather troops, but the resources of the empire are thin, its treasury drained by decades of war and tribute payments. Appeals to Western Christendom for aid go unanswered. The kings of Europe, now vassals or allies of the Khan, either cannot or will not risk his wrath. By autumn, the Mongol siege lines encircle Constantinople. The Theodosian walls, famed for their triple layers and massive towers, have repelled countless assaults, but the Mongols bring with them siege engines unlike anything the city has faced. Counterweight trebuchets hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds, their rhythmic crashes shaking the earth, while teams of engineers construct covered rams and siege towers sheathed in iron plates to resist Greek fire. Mongol archers keep the defenders pinned down, their arrows finding even the narrowest slits in the battlements. The siege is as much psychological as physical. Batu orders the display of captives taken from previous campaigns, nobles from France, England, and Italy, paraded before the walls to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Night after night, the beating of war drums echoes across the Golden Horn, a constant reminder that the city is alone. Weeks turn into months, and famine begins to gnaw at Constantinople's vast population. Bread becomes scarce, diseases spread in the cramped quarters behind the walls, and tempers flare among the defenders. The emperor attempts a daring breakout by sea, sending a fleet to burn the Mongol ships in the harbor. But the attempt is foiled by the Khan's allied sailors, who counterattack with deadly precision. By the first weeks of 1252, breaches begin to appear in the outer wall. The Mongols press these openings relentlessly, pouring into the gaps under covering fire from their siege towers. Street fighting erupts, but the discipline of the Khan's troops and their ability to coordinate cavalry and infantry in tight urban spaces overwhelm the exhausted defenders. On a cold February morning, the last resistance collapses. Batu Khan rides through the gates of Constantinople, his banner unfurled against the winter sky, the city's great dome of Hagia Sophia casting its shadow over the conqueror of continents. The terms are harsh but calculated. Churches are spared from destruction in exchange for the clergy's public recognition of Mongol supremacy. The city's artisans and merchants are pressed into service for the empire's trade networks, and the Byzantine aristocracy is stripped of power but allowed to live under strict oversight. With Constantinople in his grasp, Batu's empire becomes a seamless dominion stretching from the shores of the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Arctic wastes to the deserts of North Africa. Trade flows along secure routes for the first time in history, goods from China reaching Ireland without passing through a single border uncontrolled by the Khanate. Yet this is not a world of peace. It is a world held together by fear, tribute, and the ever-present threat of the Khan's retribution. In the years that follow, Europe's languages, faiths, and customs begin to mingle with those of Asia and Africa, forging a strange hybrid civilization under the watchful eye of the Mongol governors. Some thrive in this new order, enriched by trade and stability. Others fade, their cultures absorbed into the vast tapestry of the empire. And so the great what-if of history stands before us. A Europe and Asia bound together under one rule, a world in which the Renaissance never blooms in Florence, in which exploration across the Atlantic is delayed, or perhaps abandoned entirely, in which the future belongs not to the crowns of Europe, but to the heirs of the steppe. Would you wish to live in such a world, prosperous yet shackled, united yet conquered? Or is the world we know, fractured though it is, the better fate? Tell me, if the Mongols had truly conquered the West, would history still belong to us, or would it belong to them?